War built the world you live in. Every road, every law, every line on every map exists because someone, somewhere decided to fight for it. From the moment mankind first learned to forge metal, progress and violence became inseparable. Behind every invention that changed civilization, there was a weapon that made it possible. Welcome to ARMORIA, where war meets intelligence. Here we do not glorify bloodshed, we decode it. We uncover the strategies, the technologies, and the psychology that turned conflict into the engine of history. From swords to drones, from bronze to silicon, from kings to algorithms, this is the story of how humanity built power through destruction. Every weapon you'll see in this channel changed more than battlefields. It changed economies, governments, and the very way we think. Because war is not chaos, it is design. And those who understand that design understand the world. If you believe knowledge is the ultimate weapon, subscribe. Join the ranks of those who seek not to worship power, but to understand it. This is ARMORIA. In the beginning, conquest was an art of proximity. To rule meant to stand close enough to strike. The Roman Gladius, short, unpretentious, and lethal, was the perfect embodiment of that philosophy. Forged not for show but for system, the Gladius turned the act of killing into a mechanism of control. Its design was brutally simple, a double-edged iron blade, light enough for speed, short enough for precision, and strong enough to pierce the armor of rival nations. But the weapon itself was only part of the story. The true power of the Gladius lay in the mind that wielded it, not the hand. Rome turned war into administration. Legions became machines of labor and order, every man trained, paid, and disciplined under a structure that mirrored the empire itself. Each sword was identical, each strike measured. This was not chaos, it was industry. Every Roman legionary was, in essence, a worker of war. His gladius was his tool, his uniform a contract, his victory a source of revenue. Conquest was Rome's economy. Gold, grain, slaves, and resources flowed into the city's heart as tribute, the return on military investment. The gladius, produced by state forges, represented the first step toward the militarization of production, a concept that would define every empire after. When a legion marched, it carried not only weapons, but wealth. It transported roads, trade, and civilization itself. To wield a gladius was to become part of an industrial machine powered by ambition and money. Rome's wars were fought as much for economics as for glory. Behind every triumphal procession stood the invisible mathematics of profit. The sword became a currency of control, each thrust buying peace for the empire and fear for its enemies. The gladius was not only the blade that built Rome, it was the template of empire, the weaponized union of discipline, technology, and wealth. While Rome conquered through uniformity, Greece conquered through unity. Long before the legions, there was the phalanx, a human wall of shields and spears that transformed the battlefield into a living machine. The Greek dory spear was unremarkable in appearance, yet revolutionary in purpose. It was a weapon of geometry, long, straight, symmetrical, designed to fit within a greater pattern of movement and trust. Unlike the hero-driven wars of earlier ages, the phalanx required equality. Every soldier was both protector and protected, his survival dependent on the discipline of his comrades. This was not the war of kings, but of citizens. In the phalanx, war became the mirror of democracy. The men who fought were the same who built, traded, and voted. The spear was their investment, both in defense and identity. Wealthy citizens financed their own armor, maintaining their status through service. Poorer men supported the structure with labor, forming a social economy bound by shared risk. Each phalanx was a contract, a literal alignment of economic contribution and civic responsibility. Athens, Corinth, Sparta, all owed their survival to this weaponized cooperation. The dory was not simply wood and bronze, it was policy made manifest. At Marathon, disciplined Greek formations broke the charge of the Persian Empire, proving that coordination could triumph over chaos. At Thermopylae, the spear became a symbol of defiance, where 300 men traded their lives to purchase time for an entire civilization. And when Alexander the Great extended the spear into the Sarissa, nearly twice its length, he turned Greek discipline into a global enterprise. His armies moved like a single organism, consuming territory and exporting culture. Trade, language, and philosophy followed the spearhead, just as wealth and tribute followed victory. The Phalanx Spear introduced an eternal principle of warfare, that strategy is economy, and that unity is the most profitable weapon of all. Where Rome conquered with order and Greece with unity, the Mongols conquered with movement. From the endless steppe rose a new kind of warfare, one without walls, one without rest. The Mongol composite bow was small, elegant, and terrifyingly efficient. Crafted from wood, horn, and sinew, it possessed the strength of larger bows at half the size. It was an instrument of momentum, an embodiment of speed and precision. Fired from horseback at full gallop, it could strike an enemy hundreds of meters away before they even saw the rider. The Mongols did not merely fight battles, they engineered momentum. This bow transformed the horse into a weapon system and the steppe into a launching pad for empire. Genghis Khan understood that victory was not about numbers or brute force, but about time. Every second saved was a resource earned. Every arrow fired an investment in psychological warfare. His armies moved like storms, unpredictable and unstoppable, supported by a logistics network that spanned continents. Communication lines, relay stations, and supply routes followed the flow of arrows. The Silk Road, once a fragile thread of trade, became the bloodstream of empire. Merchants, envoys, and soldiers traveled under the same banner of Mongol protection, turning war and commerce into one. The composite bow's influence extended far beyond its physical reach. It created the first true global economy of power. Goods, knowledge, and currencies flowed safely under Mongol rule because fear ensured compliance. The bow did not just conquer territory, it created stability through terror, efficiency through fear, and wealth through obedience. Empires before had taxed victory, the Mongols monetized it. Each arrow launched was an economic decision, each victory a financial return. When Europe and Asia connected under Mongol dominion, the bow had done what no sword or spear could. It had unified the known world under one logistic system, one communication network, one definition of control. From the gladius that organized conquest, to the spear that embodied cooperation, to the bow that weaponized speed, these ancient tools did more than kill. They redefined civilization's structure, its trade, its hierarchy, its belief in control. Each weapon was a system, and every system was an economy. In their hands, humanity learned that violence could purchase stability and that technology could buy time itself. The ancients had forged not just weapons of war, but the architecture of empire, and that architecture still stands. The medieval world was built on armor. Chainmail, plate, and shield defined the boundaries of power. Kings ruled through knights, and knights ruled through iron. But in the 14th century, a simple weapon made of yew and muscle rewrote the social order. The English longbow, elegant in form, brutal in effect, turned the age of chivalry into the age of annihilation. Standing taller than its wielder, it could pierce armor at over 200 meters, and its rate of fire eclipsed any rival. A single archer could release 10 arrows in the time a crossbowman fired one. At battles like Crécy, Poitiers, and Agincourt, waves of arrows darkened the sky, falling like iron rain upon armies of noble birth. Thousands of knights, raised on codes of honor and hierarchy, were cut down by peasants who had trained their entire lives for a single moment. The longbow did more than win wars. It democratized them. It stripped power from lineage and placed it in the calloused hands of the commoner. England's army became a meritocracy of precision. The bow's dominance marked the decline of the mounted elite and the rise of professional soldiery. Economically, it was an instrument of transformation. Training an archer required decades of investment. Crafting a longbow demanded the perfect wood and the right craftsman. The English crown subsidized forests, managed yew trade routes, and built an entire state around the production of war materials. War was no longer fought solely for honor. It was financed through policy. The longbow revealed a truth that would echo through centuries, that innovation in warfare was inseparable from the management of resources. Power depended not only on courage, but on supply chains. Each arrow loosed by an archer represented an empire's investment, the fusion of biology, craftsmanship, and strategy. The longbow was the first modern weapon not just because it killed efficiently, but because it reorganized society to support its existence. When England triumphed at Agincourt, it was not simply archery that prevailed, it was a system, a state, and an economy designed for sustained precision. For thousands of years, stone had been the great equalizer. Castles, fortresses, and city walls defined security itself. They separated the strong from the weak, the rulers from the ruled. But then came the cannon, and with it, the end of fortification as humanity knew it. Born in the crucible of Chinese invention and perfected in Europe's hunger for dominance, the cannon was both a revelation and a revolution. It did not merely destroy defenses, it erased the concept of safety. When gunpowder reached the West, it transformed warfare from personal to mechanical. The cannon amplified destruction through chemistry and mathematics. Its thunder broke not just stone, but psychology. Entire kingdoms crumbled before a single piece of artillery could finish its work. The siege, once the slow dance of attrition, became an equation of logistics and investment. To maintain cannons required foundries, smelters, and a steady flow of iron, sulfur, and saltpeter. War thus became industrial centuries before the Industrial Revolution. The weapon's impact rippled through economics and architecture alike. Old castles were rendered obsolete, and the cost of defense skyrocketed. Monarchs and merchants found common cause in funding armies that could carry these new machines. War became a business venture, and the cannon was its capital. States began to centralize, not because of philosophy, but because only a centralized treasury could sustain such firepower. Out of this necessity rose the first modern governments, bureaucratic, organized, and perpetually in debt. Money had officially entered the battlefield. By the 15th century, every fortress in Europe had adapted or fallen. The cannon had turned the Middle Ages into a memory. Power no longer lay in walls but in mobility, supply, and the will to spend. Gunpowder was not just a weapon, it was currency, traded in fire and steel. The sound of cannon fire was the birth cry of the modern world. When the smoke of cannons spread across Europe, another invention quietly reshaped the face of battle: the musket. The musket was crude, heavy, and slow, but it was the first weapon to combine lethal range with scalable simplicity. It demanded no decades of training like the longbow, no nobility like the sword. A peasant could be turned into a soldier with a few months of drilling and the will to obey. In this simplicity lay the most revolutionary idea in the history of war: that mass could replace mastery. The musket turned the individual into a unit, and the army into an industry. Every soldier became replaceable, every shot measurable. Battles became fields of calculation, where success was determined not by valor but by logistics. The musket democratized violence further than any weapon before it. It erased the romanticism of the duel and replaced it with the precision of the line. Fire, reload, march, repeat. This was the rhythm of empire. But beneath the thunder and smoke lay a deeper transformation, the birth of the state military complex. Nations built factories to produce muskets by the thousands. Trade routes emerged for gunpowder, iron, and uniforms. Wars could now be planned in ledgers, not in legends. Governments borrowed money, issued bonds, and paid for soldiers with the promise of tomorrow's taxes. The musket made war predictable, and therefore profitable. In the age of exploration, this weapon carried empires across oceans. Spanish conquistadors brought it to the New World. The Ottomans used it to shatter Byzantium's last walls. It became both tool and symbol of global domination. The musket's crack echoed from Europe to Africa, from Asia to the Americas. With it, empires expanded their reach, trading gunfire for gold. War had become an enterprise, and the musket its franchise. By the 18th century, armies had become machines, states had become investors, and war had become a science. The musket was no longer just a weapon, it was the human interface of empire, the instrument through which politics, profit and progress fired in unison. From the longbow that ended feudal privilege, to the cannon that demolished the walls of the old world, to the musket that industrialized human conflict, this era defined the transformation of violence into economics. War was no longer a test of will, it was a transaction. Innovation and destruction became twin forces, feeding each other in a loop that would define the modern age. The battlefield had turned into a factory floor, and humanity's future was being forged, one explosion at a time. By the dawn of the 20th century, humanity had perfected the art of turning labor into output. The same factories that produced cars, railways, and telegraphs were now producing war itself. And no invention captured this transformation more completely than the machine gun, a weapon that mechanized killing with the precision of an assembly line. Where the sword demanded strength and the musket demanded discipline, the machine gun demanded only endurance and supply. It fired not one bullet at a time, but hundreds, transforming battle into industry. Invented in the late 19th century, the machine gun symbolized the triumph of engineering over valor. On the fields of the First World War, it reduced entire generations of soldiers to statistics. Courage meant nothing against a weapon that could fire 600 rounds a minute. The old ideals of honor and charge died in the mud of Flanders, buried beneath the rhythm of automatic fire. The machine gun erased the difference between offense and defense. It made standing still as deadly as moving forward. It turned the battlefield into a production line of corpses. But behind the horror lay profit. Each gun required belts of ammunition, oil, spare parts, and logistics. Corporations thrived, factories expanded, and governments signed contracts worth millions. For the first time, war became an economy large enough to sustain itself. Money flowed in both directions, funding destruction, then reconstruction. The machine gun had made death scalable, predictable, and profitable. It was not just a weapon, it was a business model. The invention also changed the relationship between state and citizen. Soldiers no longer fought for glory. They fought because the state demanded it and the industry supplied it. National budgets were now written in calibers, and economies adjusted their production around conflict. The machine gun was the heart of this new world, a metallic rhythm beating in sync with the pulse of modern civilization. It marked the death of the hero and the birth of the system. When the machine gun made movement impossible, humanity created movement anew. The tank was born from necessity, an armored engine designed to crush the stalemate that had strangled Europe. The first tanks were clumsy, slow, and unpredictable, but they represented a revolution in thinking. War was no longer about men, it was about machines. Steel replaced flesh, fuel replaced food, and mechanics replaced morale. The tank turned the battlefield into an arena of industry. It was a mobile fortress powered by engines, gears, and gasoline, the direct offspring of the Industrial Revolution. Its appearance was both terrifying and inspiring, a creature of smoke and metal that symbolized unstoppable progress. In its tracks lay not only destruction but transformation. Tanks required factories, oil fields, and global logistics. They connected every sector of the economy, from the mines to the foundries, from the assembly lines to the front lines. Every tank that rolled onto the battlefield carried the invisible labor of thousands. As wars grew larger, so did the machinery that sustained them. World War II became the ultimate test of industrial power. The side that could build more tanks, faster and cheaper, would win. The battlefield became a market of production, where efficiency determined survival. The tank was no longer a weapon alone. It was an indicator of national strength, a mobile currency of power. Germany's Panzers, Britain's Churchills, America's Shermans, the Soviet T-34, each was a different expression of the same philosophy. That dominance was a product of design. Beyond its tactical use, the tank redefined politics. The image of armored columns rolling through cities became the symbol of state authority. From revolutions to invasions, the tank embodied the idea that control could be enforced by sheer mass. It replaced the cavalry, not just physically, but psychologically. Where horses once carried banners of nobility, tanks carried the emblems of bureaucracy and ideology. They were the perfect metaphor for the modern state, heavy, efficient, and fueled by the constant exchange between money and power. All the centuries of invention, all the engines of industry, all the calculations of strategy culminated in one moment, August 6, 1945. The atomic bomb was not simply a weapon, it was the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. For the first time in history, humanity possessed the means to destroy itself completely. The bomb turned science into theology. It was the manifestation of divine power in mortal hands, a sun unleashed on Earth. Born from the Manhattan Project, a collaboration of physicists, soldiers, and financiers, the atomic bomb was as much an economic project as a scientific one. Its creation required billions of dollars, entire cities built in secrecy, and industries mobilized under one purpose: to weaponize the atom. When the bomb fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it annihilated not only cities, but illusions. The world had entered the nuclear age, a place where wealth, politics, and survival were now measured in kilotons. The bomb did not merely end the Second World War, it redefined the balance of power. The United States became the first nation to hold ultimate authority, not through armies but through deterrence. Possession replaced victory. Fear became the new currency of diplomacy. Nations invested not in armies, but in arsenals, building stockpiles large enough to guarantee their own destruction. The atomic bomb made peace profitable, but only through the perpetual threat of extinction. In the decades that followed, the nuclear industry grew alongside the defense industry. Power plants, laboratories, and missile silos became the infrastructure of a world addicted to security. Governments poured unimaginable sums into maintaining the illusion of control. Economies adjusted to accommodate the cost of survival. The bomb had done what no empire, religion, or ideology could. It unified the planet under the shadow of mutual annihilation. Humanity had reached godhood, but at a price it could never afford to pay. From the rattle of the machine gun to the roar of the tank to the blinding light of the atomic bomb, the industrial age of war was the age of acceleration. Violence had become automated, economies militarized, and peace commodified. Each weapon represented a new law of civilization: efficiency without empathy, progress without restraint, and innovation without end. War was no longer about domination, it was about management. The machine had inherited the earth, and mankind had become its engineer. When the smoke of the Second World War faded, the world did not find peace, it found efficiency. Among the ruins of Europe and the rise of new ideologies, a single invention emerged that would dominate every war for the next century: the AK-47. Designed in 1947 by Mikhail Kalashnikov, it was small, simple, and devastatingly reliable. Built not for the elite but for the masses, the AK-47 was the perfect union of ideology and engineering. It was more than a rifle. It was a statement. Where the West pursued precision, the Soviet Union pursued quantity. The AK could be buried in mud, dropped from a truck, or fired after years of neglect and still function. It was not designed to be beautiful, it was designed to be eternal. In an age of propaganda and poverty, it became the symbol of equality through firepower. Every revolution, every civil war, every struggle for independence found its voice in the rattle of the Kalashnikov. Economically, it was the most successful weapon ever manufactured. With over 100 million units produced, it became a global currency of conflict, cheaper than peace, easier to transport than aid. Nations used it as diplomacy, militias used it as identity, and superpowers used it as leverage. The AK-47 proved that control no longer required empires, only distribution. It turned ideology into export, transforming war into a franchise. Its silhouette appeared on flags, murals, and propaganda posters. It became the weapon of both liberation and tyranny, of freedom and fear. Unlike the Gladius or the cannon, it did not build empires. It sustained them by perpetual instability. The AK-47 democratized destruction. It gave every man the power to shape his destiny, for better or worse. It was the final evolution of the ancient principle that power belongs to those who can afford to wield it. In the world it left behind, violence was no longer exceptional, it was accessible. If the AK-47 gave everyone a weapon, the MQ-9 Reaper drone took the human out of the equation entirely. Born in the early 21st century, it represents the perfection of distance, the separation of cause and consequence. The Reaper is not a plane, but a system. Sensors, satellites, and data streams working in silent synchrony. It sees everything, strikes anywhere, and risks nothing. It is the embodiment of 21st century warfare, precise, profitable, and perpetual. Each drone is built at the intersection of industry and intelligence. It carries missiles and cameras, but its true weapon is information. Controlled by operators thousands of miles away, the drone turns war into surveillance and killing into data. The battlefield has become an office, climate-controlled, monitored, and monetized. The cost of one drone strike can reach millions, yet for governments, it is a bargain compared to the price of public scrutiny or lost soldiers. The Reaper has transformed war into administration, a managed risk, an economic equation. Its rise marks the transition from industrial to algorithmic warfare. Factories have been replaced by data centers, soldiers by analysts, and front lines by firewalls. Drones patrol borders, assassinate targets, and enforce policy from the sky. The image of a Reaper's lens, hovering above distant terrain, is the perfect metaphor for the modern empire. Omniscient, detached, and financially efficient. But its perfection hides a paradox. The drone kills cleanly, but it also kills endlessly. By removing the human cost of combat, it removes its moral weight. War has become continuous because it has become convenient. In the new economy of conflict, precision is not peace and it is perpetuity. The Reaper does not conquer territory, it maintains influence. Its shadow is the price of global control. The final evolution of conflict is invisible. No smoke, no sound, no battlefield, only code. The rise of cyber weapons and artificial intelligence warfare marks the moment when war transcends the physical world entirely. Nations no longer invade with tanks or soldiers, but with algorithms, viruses, and misinformation. The battlefield has moved into the cloud, and the soldiers are machines. This new form of warfare is built not on weapons of metal, but on the architecture of data. Electricity is the new gunpowder. Information is the new ammunition. A single cyber attack can paralyze economies, cripple infrastructure, and rewrite the perception of reality. The same networks that carry trade, communication, and wealth also carry threats. The global economy, once the engine of peace, has become the most vulnerable target. Artificial intelligence has only accelerated this transformation. Machines can now predict behavior, control drones, and execute attacks faster than any human. Warfare has become autonomous, self-learning, and potentially uncontrollable. Money and power once drove armies, now they drive algorithms. Governments invest billions into digital arsenals that can destroy without detection. The world's most valuable assets, energy grids, stock markets, satellite systems, exist inside a perpetual battlefield of code. This is war without borders, fought in silence, financed by data and hidden behind screens. There are no heroes here, no flags, no marches, only systems competing for dominance. The moral questions of this new era are unprecedented. When machines decide who lives and who dies, where does accountability live? When nations use misinformation as a weapon, what is victory worth? The age of the sword and the bomb has given way to the age of the algorithm, a war of intelligence, both artificial and political. From the simplicity of the AK-47 to the precision of the Reaper drone to the invisibility of cyber warfare, humanity has completed its cycle. The evolution of weapons has mirrored the evolution of civilization itself, from physical conquest to informational control. The business of war has become indistinguishable from the business of governance. The battlefield is now the marketplace, the soldier, the server, the victory, the data. War no longer needs to end. It only needs to be maintained. Every empire that ever rose through steel now rules through signal. The line that began with the Gladius and ended with the algorithm tells one truth. Humanity has never sought peace, only better tools for domination. From the first blade of bronze to the invisible algorithm of today, the weapon has been more than an instrument of death. It has been the measure of civilization itself. Every era forged its own reflection in metal, in fire, in code. And in that reflection, humanity has always seen both its brilliance and its ruin. The Gladius carved the foundations of empire, the spear built democracy, the bow connected continents, the cannon shattered walls, and the musket industrialized obedience. The machine gun turned courage into calculation. The tank transformed movement into dominance. The bomb gave power the face of divinity. And the drone, the algorithm, the unseen hand of AI, they turned war into management, control, and profit. History tells us that every weapon begins as protection and ends as domination. What we call progress is often just evolution with a price tag. For every innovation, a ledger of loss. For every discovery, a deeper dependency. The wealth of nations has always been financed by the shadow of conflict, and peace itself has always been the most expensive product of war. Empires rise on invention, economies bloom on destruction, and the future is always mortgaged to the weapons of the present. The truth is uncomfortable. War is not an accident of history, it is its architect. Behind every leap in technology, every network, every empire, lies the same impulse that drove a Roman blacksmith to shape a sword, or a modern engineer to program a drone. The pursuit of safety, power, and control are indistinguishable from the pursuit of progress. Humanity builds weapons not because it loves war, but because it fears weakness. Yet within that fear lies genius. The same minds that design destruction also design creation. The same factories that produce tanks build engines of exploration. The same algorithms that wage cyberwar defend hospitals and feed cities. The weapon is, and always has been, a paradox, a mirror reflecting the best and worst of who we are. And so, the question remains, have we mastered the weapon or has the weapon mastered us? Each generation believes it can control its creations, but history suggests otherwise. From swords to drones, from empires to corporations, from soldiers to machines, the tool has become the teacher. We are now students in the school of our own invention. The future of war will not be decided by the sharpness of the blade or the range of the missile, but by the intelligence that wields it, and by the courage to understand what we have built. In the end, knowledge itself is the final weapon. The mind, sharper than steel,